Good to be with you and to kind of stay on track on this Love Where You Live kind of highlight that we've had. We don't want to call it a series because it's not really. It's what we're about. It's the kind of ethos of this place. And I wanted to just kind of mention, those of you who may not know, when I'm not here, my normal day job is that I lead a doctoral program at Baylor University for ministers in Bible, theology, and ministry. And one of the things that you find a lot is, of course, it can be hard sometimes to be a pastor, just like it can be hard to be a church, right? And sometimes we need to kind of strengthen and deepen our calling and our sense of who we are. And one of the things I tell them a lot is, remember, God called you. Not someone else, you. Right? And let me just say the same thing. They may say that to you as individuals, but also to us as a church. He called you with the calling that was on your life, with the gifting that you have, with the energy levels that you have, with the kind of location and context that you have. Not other people, you. Are you understanding that? He placed us here on this corner to worship Him, to spread His good word, to be His messengers, His ambassadors, His witnesses in this area, in this region, right here. Us. Not someone else, us. 1878, yes? Just 48 people were called to start this. It was just a bunch of cow pastures. Hard to imagine now. There were no Stadium of the Eagles back when, right? This was just the cow pastures of people that said, God wants us here. And we're part of that. We're just part of that DNA. And I want you to see that. I forgot my phone. I was going to read you something. I just Googled to see what were some of the things that were said about this church outside of our own little explanation of that, right? And Collin County Collin County Historical Society was recounting the 50th anniversary of this church, right? The 13th of October, 1928, and they were talking about the people that came and preached here, the gospel that went out, and it was an ordination service for Ray Summers. Some of you may not know him, but if you're in the field of New Testament, you do know him. He became the chairman of the New Testament department at Southwestern, at Southern, and then for the most of his lifetime, he was at Baylor University doing the religion department down there, a famous kind of author and all that, right out of this church back in 1928, and he stayed there. Are you hearing me what I'm saying? That's part of your DNA. That's who you are as a church, right here. God didn't call another church right here. He called us to be at this corner right here. Grasp that. We're going to talk about that today in so many ways. I want to talk to you from 2nd Thessalonians today. That letter was one of the first letters of Paul. There's a good argument for saying, and there are two letters that could potentially be the first Paul wrote. It could either be Galatians or 1 Thessalonians. A lot of scholars would hold to 1 Thessalonians. Some would hold also to Galatians, depending on how you kind of outline Paul's life. But I want you to see what's going on here. Paul has got his first journey. He was doing that in Asia Minor. He wanted to go to Europe, but he couldn't quite go. And then he had a vision. And he saw in that vision a man in Macedonia. That's where Thessalonica is located. He said, come over here and help us. And I want to just read to you right here from Acts chapter 17, where the background of that thing happens. He gets over there, and then soon will be on his way down to Corinth, from which he will write the letter that we'll be reading in a minute. But here's the story background, right after he had heard that. He said, after they passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, massive town, and not only at that time, it's still a great seaport, where there was a Jewish synagogue. And as usual, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days, he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Messiah to suffer and rise from the dead. This Jesus that I'm proclaiming is the Messiah. Some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, including a large number of God-fearing Greeks and as well as a number of leading women. But when Jews became jealous, and they brought together some wicked men from the marketplace, and they formed a mob and started a riot in the city. And then the story goes on a little bit. They beat up the guy who owned the house where he stayed. And then verse 10, it says, "Then as soon as it was night, the brothers and sisters sent Paul and Silas away to Berea." In other words, they had to escape with their life. So they sent them out at night because they were watching all exits and entrances to the city. That's the backdrop. He was there 3 weeks, yes? 3 weeks. And there was this crowd of people that were coming together. Some of the Jews were persuaded, and they joined women that were well-to-do, that was also joining in. And this little church, scroungy little church, began. And Paul opens that second letter, which was probably written almost like immediately right after he wrote the first letter. Just a young church that he's concerned. He was just there for 3 weeks to start a church in a sea of paganism. Now, not like there were other churches around. This was the first. And here's what he says as he opens that second letter. "We ought to thank God always for you, brothers and sisters, and rightly so, because, since your faith is flourishing and the love each one of you has for one another is increasing." Wow. Did you hear that? Just a little church. Started 3 weeks. He had to escape because if not, they would have killed him. It's not like he was not accustomed to that. He had tried that before. In fact, right after he'd come to faith, he had come to Damascus. Some of you have read that story in Acts chapter 9. And he wanted to kill the Christians. And then God met him on that road to Damascus and completely told him, "You need to be my apostle." And he came into Damascus where he met Ananias. And God did a work in his life. And then he began to talk, and now people wanted to kill him, and so they had to actually lower him at night down in a basket on the other side of the city wall for him not to be killed. It's like you become a Christian, and here it comes. You become a Christian, and now you can sleep sweetly. Yeah, no. Now the calling is on your life to be his ambassador. So the question I want to ask this morning is this: what does it look like to have flourishing faith? It's kind of an intriguing way that this whole thing opened. It's somewhat of a dull kind of translation. I'm not quite sure why they did that. We ought to give thanks. That word "we ought to" really means we are indebted to God, right? We're indebted. We are living under the necessity of paying back what we owe. That's really what is carried by that word. And it changes a lot when you start thinking about it, that we are bound by the necessity of paying back to God thanks for this people who responded to the kind of calling to faith that came from the gospel. Genuine response that was changing everything. What Paul is really saying is this: that he owes it to the church in Thessalonica never to pass up the chance to tell about it, to tell about the faith that is there, to tell about the hope and the love that lives among them. It is so much that the next verse that we didn't read, he goes on to say, I can't help but to brag about you when you're someplace else. That's kind of what I do to you all, right? I say, that's just a great church up here, right? You do the same when you're out of here, yes? You know, don't forget, there are so many things that are right. There really are. You know, it's become somewhat common nowadays when you talk to many Christians and they speak about, about the church, there's this wrong, there's this wrong. There are so many things that are right. When you're outside of here, talk to other people about the people here. Talk to other people about the commitment that is here. Talk to other people about the generosity that is here. Talk to other people about the love that you can find here. If you don't find it in every corner, you still know that is here. Yes? That's what that flourishing faith does. It creates this legacy of this is what God can do among people who are committed to Him in so many and in every single way. There's just some really powerful stuff to think about here. If you talk about flourishing faith, does that change the way you talk about the church? Absolutely it does. Does it change the way you think about what God can do in and among people? Absolutely it does. Just think through it for a minute. There's a certain DNA that is developed, right? If you know anything about DNA, and I'm not an expert, so if I say something that is, well, I think I know enough to say the little thing I'm going to say about it. DNA is a molecule that exists in every cell in your body, just about. And that DNA will tell all kind of stuff about your lineage, about various kinds of things that are going on in your body. It is like the way that is expressing who you are in all aspects. Now, the Bible calls the church a body, yes? There's a certain DNA. And if you think of a DNA molecule, it has all kinds of things. Something determines your height. Something determines your gender. Something determines all kinds of things are there, right? Your lineage, your illnesses, and all that kind of stuff kind of is there. Think about this. What do you add to the DNA of this church? Are you following? If this church is a body, every cell, everything is controlled, every little particle expresses some side of that. Flourishing faith will flow out. I'm going to talk about that in a second, but I wanted to kind of ground it. Let's see, you are a part of this, right? It's also why the church the Bible never talks about the church as this organization. It's a family, right? You can attend something, but you never attend your family. You're part of it. You're not attending church. If you're a part of the church, you are the church. You look yourself in the mirror and you say, God, you gave me these gifts. You gave me this level of energy. You gave me these opportunities. You gave me this context. How do you want me to add that to who we are as a church? Love where you live. Let the DNA be visible everywhere. I hope we're seeing this and seeing the power of what's going on with some of that. So the first thing, of course, to ask with this is what really is a faith that can flourish? And I kind of like that word, flourish. The word really it leans more toward grow, right? A church that continues to grow. The first part of the question, and stay with me on this, I need to kind of talk to you about this a little bit. The first part of the difficulty of that question is that we have so many different understandings of what faith is all about. For some people, faith is somewhat of kind of a self-hypnosis, kind of you can get yourself in this mental state like you read about in the Middle Ages where they were walking on glowing embers, on their bare feet and without getting burned. And for other people, faith is just mental kind of assent, that you have some idea, if I believe certain things in my brain that doesn't really touch my daily life, it will place me in a good place in the afterlife. For other people, it means other things, right? For some people, it just means that you're able to believe the most incredible things, even untrue things. If you believe them hard enough, that will be true. No, it's not. That's never what Jesus was trying to kind of encourage ever, right? If you see that kind of stuff, we're better off not doing. We don't want to believe things that are not true. If you notice how many people that are doing that, they would just use the word faith. Just have faith. But just believe. And I say, believe in what? Have faith for what? Where does that land? There ought to be a place to land. And what sometimes happens is they change that word from being faith in to faith for. I have faith for this miracle. I have faith for this thing. I have faith for this. I can have faith that this will happen. The Bible consistently talks about having faith in God who has revealed himself through Jesus Christ. Yes? You see the difference? Faith has a location. Christian faith is faith in Christ, that he truly is the one he says he is, and he has the power that he says that he had. The faith that Jesus inspired is the faith that allowed the reformers to stand firm and hold out in spite of impossible opposition and incredible odds. They held on. It's the kind of faith that allows martyrs to hold on to the last breath. Yes, Jesus is Lord in my life and nothing else. That's the kind of faith that Jesus is talking about. The faith that flourishes is a faith that allows you to know things that otherwise couldn't be known, to see things that otherwise couldn't be seen unless you see them through Jesus Christ. Yes? It changes everything. Flourishing faith that allow you to love where you live. To have a flourishing faith, or even just a Christian faith, is that you bet your life that God speaks the truth through Jesus Christ, even when that truth will challenge you, as I mentioned also with Paul. It's hard to get over this, right? That he is even before his first journey. Chapter 9 of Acts, he's just coming to faith. And then he begins to speak that faith out, and they had to lower him in a basket at night to help him escape so he wouldn't be killed. Faith, Christian faith, bets his life that God speaks the truth. Now, there's still some that say, well, you got to have proof. Half-studied know-it-alls, they cross their arms and they say, I'll believe it if you can prove it scientifically. As if science is the only way to measure truth. I'd like to know how you can truly prove scientifically love. That you love someone else or that you are loved by someone else. How do you prove that scientifically? Or what about the emotions that flush over you as you look at incredible beauty? Or that you read a text that just unravels you, or watches something that you're thinking, wow, what's going on in my inner being? Truth is found in Christ. And you can't just do that. Comfortable kind of selfishness says, leans back in the chair and says, what do I get out of it? As if comfortability and selfishness ever gave life meaning in any way whatsoever. Cautious Christians say, yeah, I know we should believe that, and I know that we should trust God, but we haven't tried this before, and I'm not sure what would happen if I witness over here. I'm not sure what happens if I step out over here. I'm not even sure we can do this really, as if God doesn't have greater opportunities and larger vision that we might have at any given moment. Flourishing faith bets its life that God speaks the truth and that he can be trusted in every way. Let me say one last thing about proof, because I meet it a lot. Proof is just the amount of knowledge that you need to feel like, yeah, I'm convinced. And that amount and the quality of that knowledge may change by the person. You know that, right? So you have something you say, well, this proves it to me. I know this is so. I can prove it. Until you show it to a lawyer in a court case and they say, that doesn't prove anything. It could be this, or that. You hear me? Don't let, proof is even more diffuse and confusing than just trusting that God speaks the truth and see how that flourishing of faith, right? Flourishing is a great word because it speaks to what gives purpose of life. It speaks to what is joyful in life, that what makes life worth living. That's why there's so many books out these days on human flourishing. Just think about this for a moment, friends. The kind of faith that flourishes is the kind of faith that says yes because God says yes. It says yes because the Bible says yes. It says yes because all the great proofs say yes. God has said this is what it is. It's a faith that says yes to God's great vision and no to one's own personal little petty vision. It's a faith that is willing to really trust God and walk in his ways, even when it's scary to talk to that neighbor, or scary to say a word in that workplace, or scary to even step out and be open about trusting God in all things. Can I say it this way? A faith that flourishes is one that is willing to trust in real life. It doesn't work that you say God is almighty if you're not willing to bow before him. It doesn't work to say, I believe God can heal if you never pray and ask for his healing. It is not enough to just say he has power to save people if you will never witness about his name to others. It doesn't work to say, yeah, I believe God can change people's lives if he hadn't changed a bit in your life. Flourishing faith trusts God and steps out and say, he has called me to be part of this place, to share his vision for this area. As millions and millions of people are coming in, he is trusting that group of people that he placed on this corner, right here in Allen, that they will be his ambassadors, and that their faith will flourish, and that it can be said about them. It is as if Paul is saying here to this church, you're making like a legacy of flourishing faith. The word is even stronger than that. If you see it in the original language, it says that it continues to flourish. It's also why they translate is flourishing, not just that it flourishes. It continues more and more to expand, to flourish, to be known everywhere. When he writes to his second letter to the Corinthians, he talks about there are churches in Macedonia that gives not only according to what they can, but beyond what they can. It's just like proud dad again. They said, look at the church in Thessalonica. They don't have much, but they're giving, and they want to be part because the faith is ever flourishing. I think we know a little bit about, the difficulty of connecting what we do to what we say we believe. If you live on the fourth floor in an apartment complex and there's only stairs up and you forgot to buy milk, and you have a little baby under one arm, right? And what do? Well, if you're convinced you can jump out the window from fourth floor and land safely, you're not going to take the stairs down. It's not complicated. I'll do that every time, but I'm pretty convinced that I could not do that without hurting myself or someone else, right? Yes? So what do? I take the stairs down, right? Not that I live in a place like that, but I have done that. I think most people know this story, right? And this guy is standing and he's looking, and there's this motorbike that is running across a very narrow board across a deep ravines that are hundreds of feet deep. And he goes over and comes back, takes someone on the back of the motorbike, goes over and comes back, and he does it 10 times. And the looker, right, the one who's looking there, let's just call it me, he said, "Have you seen me do it?" I said, "Yeah, I did. You did it 10 times. He said, "Great. You think I could do it again?" I said, "Absolutely." "Why don't you jump on?" I said, "Yeah, I believe you can do it. I don't know that I'm ready for it," right? Trust God. The flourishing faith is just to trust God, that He is who He says He is. That's what Paul is talking about. That kind of faith when he says, we owe it to God, friends, to give thanks for you. And rightly so. When, or because, your faith continues to flourish. Because what happens? Well, you get to see the opportunity that God has, where before you may not have seen that. You may just have seen your own little options, but once you trust God, you see greater visions and greater opportunities. It's an incredible thing once you start thinking about it, right? The word right here is actually hyper-growth, what we translate with flourishing here, right? And the straight translation is that your faith continues to have hyper-growth. Whoa. That means I may have been there yesterday. I'm here now. Tomorrow I want to be here because I want to see my faith continues to not only grow, but hyper grow. And then he goes on to talk about how it gets visible. Look at this, right after that. He's talking about, and each one of you has love for one another, and it increases. It continues to increase. Just think about this. The same kind of emphasis again and again. It's a faith that can be seen. More and more it expands. Not only in this building, not only on this corner, but out from this corner further and further as you see that. It takes on, and now notice what he's saying. He is adding what he didn't say for earlier. He says, each one of you, the love that each one of you, not just that is characterizing this family, but that each one of you has. The church's DNA is there, but at any given moment, the power and the commitment and the flourishing faith of the individual will characterize the flourishing faith even of the church. Live into that, friends. Lean into that. We're standing in front of a new era. A new thing will happen, right? On April 27th, you're gonna start a new era with a new pastor that hopefully will be here for the next generation. And just be there. Live into that. See what God can do. in this place, on this corner, through you. It's Charles Spurgeon, the famed pastor of Britain, one of the ones that are called the greatest pastor since Paul. Just an orator of God's grace, right? And he says here, there are some people that try to talk about faith, that try to rationalize faith, that try to explain faith in such a way they wind up with a faith that is not worth living for and certainly not worth dying for. What I'm asking here is the faith that we have, us, together, you as an individual, is that visible? Is that something that is worth living for, even dying for? In Acts chapter 2, right after Peter has given his sermon, in that sermon, he's saying it like this. And let me end by saying this. I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. God is speaking through the prophet Joel. Peter's quoting him here. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old people shall dream dreams, your young people shall see visions. You know, dreams and visions, friends, have this in common with faith, that it always hopes for that which is better. It always anticipates that which is greater. That's just how it is. It always believes that it can happen because we serve a great God. Yes? Don't miss this. Love where you live. Let your faith flourish. Don't be satisfied with just same old, same old. Let your faith flourish. Ask yourself when you look in the mirror, what am I adding to the DNA of this body that God has placed me in right here? Let your faith, friends, be visible in God's kingdom, in Allen, in FBC Allen, if you will, in your neighborhood, and in your life. Can that be our commitment? Love where you live, because the legacy is placed there as your faith flourishes, even continues to do so more and more and more.